Hello and welcome to this webinar, Festival Enterprise, and delighted to be with you. What I'm going to do is to speak to you for a few minutes, for about 20 minutes or so, and then I see a lot of questions have already come in, so I will then do my best to try and answer as many of those questions as possible. So I think we are going through the country, the UK's most challenging time, most challenging crisis really, by far, since the Second World War. And as Mahatma Gandhi said, that strength does not come from winning. Your struggles develop your strengths. When you go through hardships and decide not to surrender, that is strength. Black swan events are crises that aren't predicted, which happen out of the blue. In the last 2 decades, who predicted 9/11? Who predicted the financial crisis of 2008, 2009? I remember when Her Majesty the Queen went to open a building in the London School of Economics soon after the financial crisis. And she asked all those eminent economists and professors there, why didn't any of you see this coming? And that's the thing about black swan events, is they come out of the blue. And what we have with the coronavirus COVID-19 pandemic is not only a tragic time, with thousands of people dying from the virus around the world, including at the time of speaking now, thousands in the UK alone. And our condolences and thoughts and prayers go out to all the families and friends and loved ones involved. It's a global crisis, it's not just a health crisis, but a supply and demand crisis with a domino effect that is reverberating around the world. In the UK, the government has ordered, in my industry, the hospitality industry, to in effect shut down, with restaurants only allowed to provide a takeaway service. Many businesses have been shut down. The high street has been shut down. The whole population is being asked to stay at home to protect the NHS and save lives, in an attempt to stop the spread of this highly infectious and contagious virus. Our restaurants, my customers, Cobra Beer supplies 7,000 restaurants, Indian, Bangladeshi, Pakistani, Sri Lankan, Nepalese, Turkish, Chinese, Thai, Lebanese, casual dining, gastropubs, restaurants, Italian, French, the whole lot have basically shut down. And our restaurants have got no business. It's the ultimate nightmare. We've been asked to stay at home to protect the NHS, save lives, and an attempt to stop the spread of this highly infectious and contagious virus. The government has, on scientific and medical advice, taken the decision to in effect shut down the economy for a temporary period of time to try to save lives, to protect the 1.5 million elderly people with underlying health conditions, the most vulnerable, and to ensure that the NHS can cope with the predicted, unprecedented burden on its capacity. And I've said this before, the NHS has a budget of about £140 billion a year. It's an institution that we all greatly love and respect. And yet Britain has one of the lowest number of hospital beds per population in the developed world. For example, Germany has in excess of 3 times more hospital beds per capita than Britain. That said, I think it's absolutely brilliant the way that the government, along with the help of the armed forces, including the Gurkhas, with the private sector and universities, East London University, for example, and the Excel Centre in East London, where they have now created a hospital with the potential of 4,000 extra beds in 9 days. 500 of those beds are already up and running, being inaugurated as we speak by His Royal Highness, the Prince of Wales, Prince Charles. So having nearly lost my business, Cobra Beer, 3 times in our 3-decade history, I found that every crisis is different and often happens unpredictably. It's getting through the crisis that it's all about. It's how do you deal with it? And we as business have to listen to the government's advice based on scientific and medical experts. We have to stay at home unless it's absolutely essential and necessary not to. And there are strict government guidelines about this, which on the whole, the British population is following. As I've said, our restaurants have had to shut their doors to their customers. So how do we survive in these coming weeks and months until we as a country defeat this virus? The government is doing its best to be of support. There are huge measures that have been brought in by the government starting on the 16th of March. If I may, I mean, you will as businesses be reading about, hearing on the press of these measures from lots of different sources. And I thought, let me just pull it all together and say, this is the help that is available to business at the moment. So start with the Coronavirus Business Interruption Loan Scheme, the CBILS as it's called. This is part of the £330 billion government guarantee loan scheme to businesses. And at the top end, before you get to CBILS, you've got the companies that are investment grade. And there are only about just over 100 companies at the moment in this country who are investment grade that can go straight to the Bank of England, issue commercial paper, and get big loans. And already about £2 billion of loans have been given to these large companies, another almost £2 billion in the pipeline out of the 330 billion. Below that, the government has just announced there was a squeeze middle where we have companies, about 5,000 of them, that are really big companies, but were not eligible for the investment grade and not eligible for the CBILS that I'm going to talk about, the under 45 million turnover companies. So the government has just announced now that companies between 45 million pounds turnover and 500 million pounds turnover will be able to get a government guarantee loan, 80% guaranteed by the government, up to 25 million pounds per company. So that's really good news that's gone through. But the main one that would apply to many of the businesses, perhaps on this webinar now, are the under 45 million turnover companies. And here what the government is offering is it will guarantee 80% of these loans, up to £5 million for a business with a turnover less than £45 million. And these loans are available through 40 banks, including the major high street banks like NatWest and Barclays. They're not always easy to get, and you will probably have to approach several lenders to be able to get a loan. Start with your own bank first. You're entitled to a loan for 6 years, with the first year interest-free and fees-free. The banks are not allowed to ask for a guarantee on your home, and you should try and get the help of your accountants in order to obtain these loans. And it's just been clarified. I mean, since the scheme started on the 23rd of March, I mean, the banks have really had to get started very quickly. People are working remotely, so it's not easy for the banks. But still, 130,000 businesses have applied for these loans to date, and only 1,000 have been approved, totaling 90 million, just 90 million pounds out of this huge 330 billion pound guarantee scheme that exists. So it's not working at the moment. So the government has said, and the banks we hear stories asking for personal guarantees. So now it's very clear, anything under £250,000, the banks cannot ask for personal guarantee. Anything above that, the personal guarantee can only be limited to 20% of the loss. And also earlier, you had to approach the bank for normal commercial lending before they can go for the CBILS loan. Now you can go as a business straight for the CBILS loan, and the bank has to look at that loan on its merit. So that should ease the pipeline and help more businesses to avail of this desperately needed cash flow that businesses need right now. And I've been pushing for the government to improve the scheme. The CBI has been pushing for the government to improve the scheme. They are listening. They may need to go further in the future. Let us see the effect of the improvements that the government has just announced over the last 24 hours. The next help the government has given is the Coronavirus Job Retention Scheme. This is the first time in the history something like this has been done to this extent. So before the end of April, businesses will be eligible to receive grants from the government of up to 80% of furloughed workers' salaries, up to £2,500 a month. This will be backdated to the 1st of March and will run for 3 months. The employees cannot work during this period, and this is to enable businesses to retain employees and not make them redundant while surviving the crisis. This is an excellent scheme where companies are encouraged, please do not. For example, my joint venture partners, Molson Coors, Cobra's joint venture partners, we have decided that yes, many employees will be furloughed, but no one's losing their jobs as a result of the COVID-19 crisis. There is also the Coronavirus Self-Employed Income Support Scheme. if you're a self-employed individual, member of partnership, and if you've submitted your income tax self-assessment tax return for the tax year 2018-19 and have traded in the tax year 2019-20, and the government has relaxed the deadline to submit the applications for this for your tax returns, and if your trading profits are less than £50,000 and more than half your income comes from self-employment, you can claim a taxable grant worth 80% of the trading profits up to a maximum of £2,500 a month for 3 months. The money grant will be paid directly into your bank account in one installment in June. There are lots of other details I don't want to go into to qualify for this scheme, but it's an excellent scheme providing help to self-employed people. The next help the government is giving is business rates. For small retail, leisure, and hospitality business, the business rates discount has been raised to 100% for the 12 months from April 2020 to April 2021. For businesses that have a rateable value up to £15,000, you're eligible for a grant of £10,000 distributed by your local authority. Businesses with a rateable value between £15,000 and £50,000 eligible for a grant of £25,000. And businesses which receive the small business rate relief will receive a grant of £10,000. This is given by your local authority directly to the business. If I were you, I wouldn't wait for the local authority to approach you because they may miss businesses. Make sure you get in touch with the local authority to get that grant if you're eligible for it. Statutory sick pay. Small businesses will be able to reclaim SSP due to coronavirus for up to 2 weeks of an employee's salary. VAT. Q1 VAT payments have been deferred with immediate effect, and there will be no payments until the end of June. Businesses will have until April 2021 to pay this back. Self-assessment payment. For the self-employed, income tax assessment payments due on the 31st of July this year will be deferred until 31st January 2021. Again, this is a lot of help with cash flow. HMRC, Her Majesty's Revenue and Customs, businesses that cannot afford to pay tax bills because of the coronavirus crisis can contact HMRC to request a time to pay agreement, which will suspend any debt collection by HMRC. Reports I'm hearing are that HMRC are being very helpful and very understanding. And if they agree, they will enter into an installment agreement and may suspend debt collection proceedings. And then you can agree a payment plan further down the road to pay the taxes delayed. There is a dedicated HMRC helpline, 0800 024 1222. I repeat that, 0800 024 1222. Rent. The government has introduced emergency legislation through the COVID bill to ban evictions for commercial tenants for at least 3 months. So if your landlords are pushing you for rent, you can delay it by 3 months and they cannot throw you out. This is not a rental holiday. Landlords are still owed the rent, so you have to work out a payment program to pay the rent later. Creditors. I mean, all businesses are under pressure, and your suppliers will be under their own cash flow challenges and wish to collect money from you for products and services they provided to you. You'll have to do your best, and some suppliers will be in a stronger position to be more flexible and maybe give you some more time, whereas others will be desperate from their own survival point of view to try and collect cash from you, their customer. Not going to be easy. Filing of accounts. Businesses will be given an additional 3 months to file accounts with Companies House to help avoid penalties. AGMs, annual general meetings. The government is also looking at solutions for the impact that the coronavirus crisis may have on companies' ability to hold AGMs. For example, they may allow AGMs to be held virtually and proxy voting. Universal credit. The Chancellor's announced the Universal Basic Allowance and Working Tax Credit Basic Element will increase by £1,000 a year for the next 12 months. This will apply to all new and existing universal credit claimants and to existing working tax credit claimants. Now, we know already over 1 million people have applied for universal credit. We know in America, record levels, I believe the figures approaching 10 million people applying for benefits in America. That is just a spike that they've never seen before. So this is a very challenging time. Insurance. Now, this is an area where the reality is most businesses may not have the insurance to compensate them for coronavirus losses, as standard policies do not include forced closure by the authorities. So many are rightly upset that thousands of businesses have bought policies in good faith and who through no fault of their own are unable to trade. Even some businesses who have cover for infectious diseases have been unable to claim, as COVID-19 is never included in any list of diseases covered by this type of insurance. So those are a summary of some of the measures. On top of this, for example, there are measures coming out all the time that the government has said that businesses cannot be accused of wrongful trading. That's also just come out as more help, and more help will continue to come out. So where do you seek to get help? I'm just to run through a list. Your accountants, please make sure you use your accountants at a time like this, whether it's applying for bank loans or any other advice, tax advice as well, getting delay from the HMRC. Your bank, if you're applying for the CBILS loan, your own bank is the first point of call. Then you can try all the other 40 you may have to shop around. You almost definitely will have to shop around. Your lawyers, your local authority, the CBI, where I'm proud to be Vice President, the Confederation of British Industry, we have set up a CBI Coronavirus Hub, www.cbi.org.uk/coronavirus-hub. That is really useful. It's updated all the time. It is not just for CBI members. It's available to all businesses at this time. The Coronavirus Hub also connects you with other business organizations, including the FSB, the Federation for Small Business. Her Majesty's government business support itself, there's a website that you can always look up, www.businesssupport.gov.uk/coronavirus-business-support. And there's a helpline number for the government, 0300 456 3565, 0300 456 3565. So from all these measures that I've tried to summarize, government is trying its best to help businesses tide over and survive the coronavirus crisis over the coming months. I mean, I think our young Chancellor Rishi Sunak has been absolutely brilliant, and he's receiving wide-ranging praise in the way that he's handling the situation. But even he has said very clearly, despite the best efforts, not everyone will be able to be helped, and that sadly, already hundreds of thousands of jobs have been lost. The government is providing the loan guarantees I've spoken of 330 billion. If you total up all the other measures, it could total up to 60 billion pounds, almost 400 billion pounds of support. And on top of that, the Bank of England has already announced quantitative easing QE of 200 billion, and they've slashed interest rates to 0.1%, the lowest in the history of the Bank of England since it was established in 1694. These are all unprecedented measures in unprecedented times. However, there are many who will still feel that they're not included in these measures of help. For example, startups are not included at all. The gig economy members. The charity sector is on its knees and is crying out for help from government. And the irony of it all is this is when the charity sector's revenue has completely dried up, and this is when they're needed more than ever to help the country and society and businesses in this difficult time. And there's no question that the coronavirus pandemic has been catastrophic for the country and for the economy and for our industry. The whole country is suffering in having to self-isolate, with the vast majority of us not being allowed to work. It has affected every area of business, including manufacturing. For Cobra Beer, curry restaurants have been our foundation and our bedrock. With the restaurants now closed, the vast majority of our business has come to a stop. Even our manufacturing for our supermarkets, we can only, because our production is being curtailed. Please forgive the noise in the background. Will you just forgive me for 1 second? I apologize for that. With manufacturing, we are now supplying the supermarkets, which are of course running, but we can only produce one SKU of Cobra, our big bottle Cobras, because our production facilities are curtailed because not all our workers, for safety reasons, can be present. So even production is being curtailed, and we can't produce as much as we would like to. So it is a nightmare for all businesses, for all of us. What is also tragic is that because we live in a world that is more interdependent and interconnected than ever, what happens in one country has a domino effect in another. I will give you an example. The vast majority, over 2/3 of the Indian restaurants are owned and run by Bangladeshis. And Her Excellency, the High Commissioner for Bangladesh, is in touch with me on a daily basis, bringing to my notice the existential crisis that COVID-19 has caused, with retailers closing shops around the world, leading to garment factories, including in Bangladesh, shutting down at an alarming rate, with a devastating impact on garment workers. Clothing brands are cancelling billions of dollars worth of orders, affecting millions of workers in Bangladesh alone. I mean, this is absolutely tragic. The government in March 2020 has taken the drastic steps of, in effect, quarantining the country with advice to stay home, protect the NHS, and save lives. The virus is spreading around the world with increasing numbers of world leaders, including His Royal Highness the Prince of Wales, Prince Charles, our Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, becoming infected. We have to do our best as individuals and businesses to stop the spread of the virus. The government has already written directly to every one of the 1.5 million elderly and vulnerable people to stay at home for 12 weeks. And finally, at the end of March, the government started testing NHS staff who are the most exposed. They need to know more than anyone if they do not have the virus, so that they can go back to work, doing the fantastic work for which the whole country admires. I mean, isn't it marvelous that on Thursday, the 26th of March, and yesterday, the country came out on their doorsteps and to the windows, clapping and applauding our fabulous NHS and care workers treating those affected by COVID-19. Which brings me to a point that I've been banging on about for over 2 weeks: testing. What is most required is for antigen testing to be available widely to the NHS, of course, first to the patients themselves, the NHS, but more widely to test the general public, and to make sure that those who test positive are immediately isolated, and those who test negative can carry on working. And as important, the government needs to make widely available the ability of the country to have the pinprick blood test, the antibody tests, which will show if someone has had the coronavirus, COVID-19, which will mean that they most probably have immunity to coronavirus and can therefore go out and about without the fear of infecting people or getting infected themselves. This will be the best way of getting people back into work and getting the economy up and running. There's no question that coronavirus is not only an infectious disease, but can be deadly, in particular with the elderly and the most vulnerable. But in the most vast majority of cases, people get relatively mild symptoms and recover in just over a week or so. Many younger people, including children, do not show any symptoms at all. Therefore, we do not know how many individuals around the country who may have had the coronavirus and do not know it. The antibody test is crucial. And my family and I have been isolating since the 15th of March. The doctor has visited us and has said that we almost definitely have had the coronavirus, but we have not had the ability to be tested because the testing was withdrawn around the 12th to 13th of March. No testing was allowed other than people admitted to hospital. So we don't know for sure if we've had the virus, but if this antibody test is available, we can have the test which will prove we've had COVID-19, we have the immunity, and we can go out and work and take part in life and contribute to the economy and the welfare. So that's crucial. And I'm an example here, just waiting for those antibody tests. I'm absolutely delighted that Matt Hancock, the Health Secretary, yesterday announced and has listened now to what became a national clamor for wide-ranging testing, and he's now engaged the private sector, engaged universities, engaged independent laboratories, people like the Francis Crick Institute, University of Cambridge, University of Birmingham, all getting involved now, and we're going to have widespread testing, and 10,000 tests a day today, he's saying we're going to be 100,000 tests by the end of this month, which is great news, and I think will be crucial to helping us come out of this crisis. So to conclude, before I start taking some questions, as a percentage of GDP, the government's support measures for business, individuals, and the economy, I'm proud to say, is one of the highest in the world. We are fortunate as a country, despite having just 1% of the world's population, being the 6th largest economy in the world and being one of the wealthiest nations in the world. To put things in context, at the time of World War II, government ran deficits of 20% per year for 5 years. and government debt reached 250% of GDP. Currently, government debt is under 100% of GDP, and our average deficits have been around 4% of GDP. So the government has said it will do whatever it takes to get us through this crisis, which means they're willing to do even more than the measures I've outlined earlier. So I'm convinced that with the combination of a committed government willing to support the country, taking the measures that will make sure that we stop the spread of the disease and flatten the exponential curve of the disease, making sure we do not exceed the capacity of the NHS, combined with testing, combined with the trial of existing drugs for other illnesses that are being tried for COVID-19, and I'm hearing stories from around the world that are being successful, so if we can show those are successful in treating people and curing people of COVID-19, that will be great news. The work on a vaccine that is taking place, which may come out sooner than the year and 18 months that people are talking about, we will be able to beat coronavirus and get the economy working again very soon, and also be able to deal with any second wave if it happens in the coming winter. In my experience over the last 30 years, I've found three things have got me through my crises, my times when I nearly lost my business 3 times. Firstly, having a strong brand. Secondly, having the support of my team and family. Thirdly, behaving with integrity. Our British business is strong. Britain is a strong brand. The SMEs of this country, the entrepreneurial companies of this country, are the engine of our economy. Many of our businesses have started from nothing. Many of them are family businesses. Many of them are pioneering entrepreneurs who built businesses from scratch, winning customers and putting back into their local communities. We, as a family of businesses, will support each other through this nightmare, and we will always be resilient and always do the right thing, always behaving with integrity, even in the face of the utmost adversity. As the Prime Minister said in his letter to every citizen in the country, it is with the great British spirit that we will beat the coronavirus, and we will beat it together. So those are my remarks, and thank you very much. If I may now try to address some of your questions. I've got a whole list of questions over here. So one of them is, do you think the current pandemic will awaken the world to the need of changing the way we live, work, and play in the future for the better of our planet? That's from Kevin. Absolutely. I think what is happening now is not only the most challenging time any of us probably have ever experienced, but is also very surreal. The fact that we are not allowed to go out, that we're locked in, the fact that we are doing what we're doing right now, using technology to communicate with each other. I've used Zoom, for example, much more in the last few weeks than I have in all the time before, combined, multiplied by many times. And we're showing that we can actually operate in this way. We're already seeing the benefits environmentally around the world, with the slowing down of transportation, of the general level of pollution has dropped, and you're seeing lots and lots of examples of this coming from around the world. So this proves more than anything else that environmentally, the more the effort that we put in, we can make an immediate difference to our planet. And I think that is a very positive message that's come out of this. And the way we work, I think it's also made us appreciate, more than anything, appreciate how much human interaction is so important to our way of life, how we miss just going out, meeting friends, going to restaurants, going to pubs, meeting, socializing, friends, family, human interactions that we take for granted. They are so important. But we also know that the human race is so adaptable that we've been able to adapt, thankfully using technology, to be able to work the way we do. So I hope we will appreciate all the things we've taken for granted even more when we're out of this crisis, which will be soon. The next question is, we're experiencing a dip in revenue, but focusing all our efforts on still getting in and completing work from home. Are we being foolish? I.e., should we furlough some staff to take the pressure off rather than trying to beat the tiger, as it were? It's a very good question. And I think that's the decision every business has to take. I think that if you have staff who cannot actually, at a time like this, contribute. So if I give an example of my field sales team at Cobra Beer, they cannot go out and visit restaurants. The restaurants are shut. So the practical reality there is it's better to furlough them. On the other hand, some of our production team are actually working and are needed to work to produce the beer that we need to sell to the supermarkets to service our customers and consumers. So in that case, you don't furlough people because they're necessary. So I think it's a decision you have to make. And the flexibility is there, and that you can furlough people for 3 weeks, try it out. They can't work while they're furloughing, and you can bring them back on after 3 weeks. So people can come on and off furlough, but it has to be for a minimum of 3 weeks. So you have to make that decision, but it is a big help to your cash flow if you can get that contribution up to £2,500 per employee per month the government is offering. Any new governance on collecting debts at this time, B2B? Collecting debts it's a hugely important issue this time, because you're putting pressure if you're trying to collect debts, in our case, from our distributors, or in our distributors' case, to get it from the restaurants. Everyone's experiencing cash flow difficulties at this time, and people have got to be as supportive as possible. So one's got to try and be practical about this. So, for example, in our case, we're saying, if you've actually taken delivery of beer and sold that beer, please could you pay us for it? On the other hand, if you've got beer that's not sold, sitting in stock, that you've not been able to sell because the government's ordered you to shut your business, well, maybe we can wait for that, and let alone orders in the pipeline. So I think I've seen this with the garment manufacturers, some retailers here who have been absolutely appalling in their behavior and just cancelled all their orders. And these are huge companies, I won't name them. And I think that behavior is absolutely appalling. On the other hand, there are other retailers who've been examples who've said, nope, we will honor the orders that we've already given. Anything manufactured being already made, we will pay for and dispatch to us, even though we may not be able to sell it because our shops are closed. That's doing the honorable thing. So thank you for that question. My next question is, my recent experience that some suppliers are pulling in their credit terms tighter and threatening to use money claim online, recover their debt. Is there any plan for rationale for the court process at the moment? You know, this is the pressure that everyone's going to be feeling, because the domino effect of this goes all the way from the shop front right the way down the supply chain. Everyone is squeezed for cash. I mean, there are many businesses, different statistics and surveys. Some businesses only have 2 weeks worth of cash, so they're already out of cash. Some businesses have 3 weeks, 4 weeks. So if people are out of cash and you're getting pressure from your creditors, you're trying to collect money from your debtors who can't pay you, it's going to go down the chain. So this is a really, really difficult time. And I think people have got to do their best to be as supportive as they can. Bigger businesses in particular, who have the ability, should be paying their suppliers as much as they can to take that pressure off. But I think that it's a very challenging time. Now, in the next question, I would like a discussion around forming a new social contract between business, people, and society. Banks have not learned lessons from 2008. Government handing out cash sums with seemingly no return conditionality for corporations, vast sums. Now, this is a very good question. Alok Sharma, the business secretary, very clearly said in his latest update, one of the daily updates that he was chairing yesterday, the day before, he said very clearly, look, banks, we bailed you out a decade ago. Now it's your turn to support business. Sadly, the banks are not doing this. That's shown with the CBIL scheme, where 23rd of March today, 130,000 businesses applied, only 1,000 have got loans, and that to only £90 million out of this multi-billion pound support figure. And the horror stories of banks asking for personal guarantees and putting your house on the line and trying to sell you commercial loans with high rates of interest, taking advantage almost, or seem to be taking advantage of businesses in distress, where the government's now had to step in and say, you can't do that. You cannot take a personal guarantee for under £250,000. And above that, the first 20%, if you take a personal guarantee, only 20% will you be liable for, and the government will take the rest. And you have to look at these CBILS loans. You can't force businesses to go through other loans as well. So I think that the banks really need now to support business, and they've been bailed out before. And I really do believe that the banks need to show this support. If we go back up, there are lots of questions over here. There was one question about how Cobra Beer coping with the current crisis. I think I've already touched on that. I think what is very important is to make sure that you really look after your employees at a time like this. And we've held regular conference calls. Also, the talks like I'm doing now, this webinar, I've held with our restaurateurs, with hundreds of restaurateurs, giving them advice, hearing their challenges, feeding them through those challenges, and communicating with each other throughout. And even when employees on furlough, you can continue to communicate with your employees. They can continue to listen in or participate in conference calls, Zoom calls. So I think that's very important that we do that as well. In terms of people and society, I think this is also a time where Carolyn Fairbairn, the Director General, Dame Carolyn Fairbairn, Director General of CBI, wrote an article in the Times this week where she said, business is the fifth emergency service. I think this is when also business comes into its own, even when it's got its hands tied behind its back. But also, business shows how important it is to the country, not just the economy. And people take for granted that it's business that creates the jobs, that pay the taxes, that pay for the public services. And people take that for granted, let alone all the good work that business does, the phenomenal work that I can see from our restaurateurs. So many restaurants, I see pictures sent to me regularly of our restaurateurs preparing hundreds of meals a day and delivering them to their local hospital, personally to the nurses and the doctors, and so appreciated by them. In every way, businesses can do so much. And I think this is a time for the country to appreciate the good that business does for the community and for the country. If I go further down, there's some great questions here. The old system is broken. What can ordinary people do to ensure the powers that be learn the lessons and we don't return to status quo? Now, this is the time where it's very frustrating and everyone is looking to point fingers and to blame people. Why didn't the testing start earlier? Why did Public Health England centralize the testing and not open it up? Why didn't we get the private sector engaged earlier? And I think one of the lessons learned is we've got to work in partnership. We've got to be as prepared as possible for these black swan events. And as I said earlier, with crises, it's how you deal with them. Now, if we had more hospital beds compared with, say, like Germany does, 3 times more than we do, that would mean the pressure on the NHS wouldn't be as much as it is now. Now, we've reacted very quickly and I think brilliantly with the Excel Centre Nightingale Hospital. But looking ahead, maybe that's something we need, that as it is, our hospitals are under pressure, maybe we need to invest in more capacity going forward. In terms of, we have some of the best pharmaceutical companies in the world, gold standard, we're proud of them. However, when it comes to testing capacity, we've now had to ramp it up and make sure there's more testing capacity, and we work in collaboration. I've seen this time and again as Chancellor of the University, as Chairman of the Advisory Board of the Cambridge Arts Business School, Chancellor of the University of Birmingham. When you work collaboratively with business and universities, working together, it's so powerful. And now this testing is going to be unlocked by getting universities and the business and the government all working together to ensure we have this testing capacity. So I think this shows more and more how important that is. And with regard to, can you tell us more about her Cobra Beer? Well, again, I keep touching on it, how we through this, giving examples of how we're dealing with it. Of course, it's how we come out of it as well. How prepared are we now that this is a temporary situation? There's no question about it. It's temporary, whether it's a few weeks or a few months, it's temporary. how do we come out of it? How can we hit the ground running? And of course, it's very open-ended because it's a global crisis. And we're, as a country, we're net importers of product, including from the European Union. So as long as that free frictionless trade continues, which at the moment in the transition period we have that frictionless trade with the European Union, and we're continuing to get what we need for our supply chain. And I think that's absolutely crucial, and be able to export what we produce as well. So I think being able to hit the ground running is going to be crucial. What have I learned from the previous crises you've been through to get through this one? I've spoken about that in my introductory remarks. We're experiencing a dip in revenue, but focusing all efforts on still getting in and completing work from home. Are we being foolish? The furlough question I've answered earlier. Collecting debts we've covered. Credit terms we have covered. Now, we have to pay rates on our office, but cannot currently use our office. Could we not see business rates stop for non-retail? This is being, as far as I know, this is something that is being pushed for very hard. I'm not aware of it having been announced yet, but I'm hopeful, if it hasn't been announced already, it'll be announced that the business rates holiday that is there for hospitality and retail should really apply to any business that is unable to operate at this time. So I'm hopeful that will come through, and the government is listening, by the way. That's why all these modifications and new measures are coming out continually since the 16th of March. I'm hearing conflicting advice. Can furloughed employees do other work outside the employer or not? This is to do with the contract with your employer. And some employers will say, no, you cannot work for anyone else while you're on furlough. What they will allow is for you to do voluntary work. So if you're furloughed and you want to go and do voluntary work, or if you're one of these 750,000 people who signed up to volunteer, you can do that. Some employers may allow you to go and do other work, but on the whole, it tends to be if you're furloughed, you can't work. Now it says here, what is your view on car leases where finance companies are only deferring for 3 months, but will collect at the end of the contract? We're unable to use vehicles in the spirit. I've suggested simply adding 3 months to contract. This has been refused. Surely the situation demands flexibility from all. That includes the profit-centered financial service sector. I will take this one up, if I may, and feed this through to government as a specific issue. Are Airbnb properties eligible for the recently announced small business grant of £10,000? Now, if you are, there are eligibilities to which businesses are eligible for this, and whether you are paying, if you've got the rate relief, small business rate relief, then any business which has got that relief should be eligible, or if you've got rates of under 10,000. But again, this is something very specific that one needs to check up on. I can make an inquiry about that. Do you think it is very likely that interest rates and inflation will rise after this? And do you estimate for how much? This is a very good question. There is always a fear that when you have large amounts of government funding like this and quantitative easing, that it will lead to inflation and higher interest rates going forward. Now, after the financial crisis, this did not happen. The huge amounts of quantitative easing, interest rates going right down to almost zero, and we did not have inflation. In fact, we've had very low inflation all the way through until now. In fact, quite frankly, the fear is the other way around. We're more worried about deflation going ahead. In my view, I would be more worried about deflation going ahead than inflation. And I think our economy is well structured that we do not get a sort of hyperinflation scenario. And also we have I'm very confident that we have the lessons that we learned at the financial crisis, where there was a blame game between the Treasury and the Bank of England and the FCA. In the good times, the merry-go-round, and it became a blame-go-round. And we had this light touch regulation that we were very proud of as a country. Well, I think it was too light. I think we've now got the regulatory and supervisory balance much better. And I think the role the Bank of England plays is excellent. I think the role the Treasury plays is excellent. I think the role of the FCA and various people is far better than it was before. And I think we have great institutions in place to be able to prevent something like hyperinflation taking place, and to be on top. We have fiscal and monetary measures that we can use, and to drop interest rates down to 0.1%. never before in our history of the Bank of England, going back to 1694. You were founding chairman of the UK India Business Council. How are India coping? India is going through a very difficult time. It's a big fear that a country of 1.3 billion people, it's in shutdown now for 3 weeks. And to shut down a country like India is hugely challenging. And with the huge rural economy, 40 cities with over 1 million people each, the large cities like Mumbai and Calcutta, Delhi, over 20 million people, people living, sadly, a lot of people in poverty living in slums, close quarters. They are terrified that if the disease spreads, it'll be very, very difficult to control. The only aspect is India's now entering its hottest time of the year, the Indian summer, where in many parts of the country temperatures go above 40 degrees. We don't know yet the science behind this virus. In the past, with flu-type viruses, they tend to be much more in the winter and hardly in the summer. And this is a flu-type virus. Will it behave like that? Will it abate and start disappearing as the hot weather starts? We don't know. We don't know that at all. You can't bank on it. But India is certainly very, very concerned about it. There aren't that many cases at the moment, but they are very worried, and the government is taking pretty tough measures there at the moment. I'm in regular touch with my family, including my 83-year-old mother, who I speak to every day, and they're going through the lockdown like we are. I have not heard the letter being received yet from Boris, but I believe it has been sent out at a cost of over £3 million with an attachment to it. But I'm sure it's in the Post. And the Post, of course, they're also struggling. And it's been amazing. I mean, and all are, when we talk about the critical workers, and of course the emergency services and the NHS and the hospital, and everyone, but it's everyone involved in keeping the economy going at this time. The cleaners, the postal workers, everyone. I think we have to be so grateful to everyone, and many people putting themselves in the face of danger. This is remarkable what this country is doing. So we've got another 5-6 minutes left. Somebody said, be careful with Zoom, it's not secure. Well, Zoom keeps assuring us that it is. I'm just going to see, we've dealt with furlough before, and it is difficult. And somebody is over here saying it's good in certain circumstances. Businesses providing essential services, trying to trade, but operating at reduced level. The furlough system cannot be used because where is it? Because it must be taken in 3-week blocks. It's a massive disincentive and a planning impossibility in many instances. The system must be enhanced to shift a daily furlough system to a more effective and fit for purpose. What I've been saying to the government is you've got to allow some sort of part-time so that you can have people furloughing for most of the time, but able to do some work as required. So giving the example of my sales team who are furloughed, I would really, it'd be so good if they were able to spend some time on the phone to their customers and messaging their customers and speaking to their customers. And at the moment, they're not allowed to do that. So I think I've already made that suggestion to government. So we'll keep pushing on that. And over here, we've got many SMEs are saying the furlough system is not sufficient to help them keep going as cash is running out, yet the banks are taking weeks to process loan applications. Despite BBB underwriting, cash is not getting out of the sector swiftly enough to help many SMEs. Have you any advice for what else they can do? This is the challenge. So you've seen what business is doing. So assume you're a retail outlet, you've got no business, your rates are free, you can delay your taxes, you can delay your VAT, delay if you're self-employed, your self-employed payment coming up in July. You've got all these measures. You can furlough your employees. If you're self-employed, you can get that £2,500 a month, but you've still got creditors chasing you for money. You've still got payments that have to be made. You need the cash right now. And that's why it's crucial that the CBILS loan scheme works and that businesses can access that very, very quickly. And that's not happening at the moment. And these modifications the government have made now, let's hope it's now going to be not 130,000 businesses applying and 1,000 getting loans, and much more of a ratio of people applying, getting loans, and quickly. So if it doesn't, I'm watching and I'm pushing for even more, making it easier for businesses to be able to get these loans, because cash flow is key to business surviving at this time. So we have now just 3 minutes left, and I've got 3 more questions that I think I haven't covered. Do you have any advice for directors of SME and small? I think I've sort of spoken about how SMEs are absolutely crucial, and there's directors directors have to keep things going. And I think directors are also entitled to be furloughed, but then you can't run your company. And I think if at all possible, directors should keep going at this time, and keeping things and holding the ship going to be ready when things open up. And finally, please lobby the government to support directors for loss of income. Currently, the schemes are forgotten us. Well, if you're a director and the problem is you have to furlough yourself. And if you furlough yourself, you can get that 2,000 you're on the payroll, 2,005 up to 2,005 pounds. But unfortunately, then you can't work. So this is a challenge, and I will continue to push. I have raised this before, and I will continue to push for directors also to be able to. But as I said earlier in my remarks, not everyone is being looked after here. People are being missed, as I gave the charitable sector as an example. I gave startups as an example. They're really suffering because they're not covered by any of these schemes, and their funders, a lot of them are pulling their funding, which they were due funding, and they're now not giving the funding. So this is a really, really challenging time. So I think we're out of time. There are 2 minutes left. I'm looking for guidance. Do I have to bring this to a close now? Yes, so I'm bringing this to a close. I want to say what a privilege it's been to be with you. If I may just make one or two concluding remarks. I think that the key to being entrepreneurs, there's that one word that sets apart entrepreneurs from other people, and that it's guts. It's the guts to do it in the first place, but more importantly, it's the guts to stick with it when others would give up. This is the time. This is the time, as Churchill said, never give up, never ever give up. We've got to be resilient in the face of adversity. And the test of leadership is not in the good times. The test of leadership is in the difficult times. And it cannot get more difficult than this. So this is our test. We've got to work together, look after our families, look after our employees. We will get through this. We will be stronger for it in the long run. Thank you, and I wish you all the best.